Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of SEO Fight Club. I'm saying hello in the YouTube chat and reminding people to ask questions. Please be sure to ask your questions early because we don't always have time to get to all of them. We usually do, but occasionally we don't. And if it's at all urgent, you want to ask early to make sure we get to it. Um, all right, so updates. Let's see. I'm still coding the beta of the new technology, the next evolution of what Cora will become. And I get closer by the day, and it is gonna be pretty cool, in my opinion. Um, there will be some learning curve to it. There was learning curve to Cora, and so this is kind of going to be the same. You're going to have to learn this new tool set that does a lot of Cora-like things and a lot of new and powerful things. And so, yeah, I don't want to give too many spoilers, but this is the tool I would want to use doing SEO right now. So that's kind of the idea. Given the AI, given how the world is changing, what can we put down that would just make it all feel good? And so that's what I'm shooting for. Let's see, Lee, you have an announcement, right?
Yeah, we have tested SEO training starts next week. Our group opens tomorrow. We've had, as always, a few last minute people reach out. So if you want in, you're going to have to reach out to me on Teams and set up an appointment to talk about it. And if you need information, just go to testedseotraining.com.
All right. And with that, we have a presentation today from Charles. So this should be pretty cool. It's all about indexing.
And one of these days, I'll figure out how to use these controls. All right, so let me share my screen. All right, you guys should see my screen. I'd like to talk about indexing signals. And these are lessons so some of you may be aware, Google is doing something that they're calling new. It's Search Central Live Deep Dive. And they did this over in Bangkok, Thailand, in July, end of July. Oh yeah, the dates are right there on the slide, 22 to the 25th. It was a 3-day conference, and I usually ignore most Google videos and most Google events because they're all just, I don't know. I don't really find the information that helpful. However, I came across one deck or a post on LinkedIn or something like that. I was like, oh, that's actually very, very interesting. And then I started finding people who took pictures of the slides, and I found it very interesting. So day one was all about just a high-level overview of search and AI systems, how they connect to internet. Then they started talking about crawling. Day two was pretty much all about indexation. And I have most of the slides, or I've seen a lot of the slides from that day too, and they look pretty good. And then day three, and I didn't realize there was a day three until last night when I was putting this deck together. Day three, they started talking about search results and how they're actually creating ranked. I haven't seen hardly anything written about day three, so they either did some kind of blackout, which is probably not likely, or they didn't really say anything of any consequence in any way, shape, or form. Um, so some takeaways and learnings. I think there was a lot discussed there, and I have complete FOMO. I totally feel like I missed out. While I'm not taking a flight to Bangkok at any time soon to see a Google presentation, I really feel like that information, if they come and do this in the US someplace, I'm going to probably make the trip and actually watch it.
Mhm.
Um, Heavy focus on AI crawling indexation, which is, that's my jam, baby. Um, what I really liked is some of the things they started talking about, some of the decks, some of the slide decks that I saw. We can test everything. Like a lot of these things can be tested, so we can see whether Google's actually kind of telling the truth or are they not telling the truth. Or at the very least, if you don't feel like going into deep testing, because I'll agree, it's a pain. At least look at your field data. You can look at the field data and see does this match what Google is claiming? And also a warning to everybody, both on this call, attending this call and listening, is I'm going to talk about this for a while, probably forever. Everyone's going to get really sick of me talking about these decks because there's so many slides and there's so many learnings that I really feel like there's a lot to talk about here. So, get ready. I'm not going to
Yeah,
let this
I'm
one
I'm going
go.
to agree with you because I've seen the slides and I know some of the things that you're planning on discussing. And I would agree with you. If they were going to have another one of these in the US, I would be there. So
And
It- it-
I can attest to occasionally Google will leak useful information at a conference. And the memorable times that it has, in my experience, have shaped the way I do SEO going forward. So, yeah, it can be that profound.
a lot of the decks, slide decks that I saw, honestly, and that's why I had that first point there where I said I had complete fear of, missing out. Um, because the information was good, and I really, really would have loved to hear the Googler talking about what they had on the slide. Because I feel they often let things slip out, whether intentionally or unintentionally. You can also understand things by things they do not say, which I sometimes find what they don't say just as informative as what they do say.
And
So
the
yeah.
other thing, if you have it, would be the author slide. You know, what position did they have at Google? Are they, on the management team or are they a search engineer? Because those things are important about the nature of the leak.
So on some of the slides, and we'll see this in a few moments, but on some of the slides, there was just it was a picture that was taken by somebody in the audience. So some of these slides over the next couple weeks, there's going to be heads in the way and people standing and people blocking some of the slides. But the person presenting was typically, it seemed to be the person kind of in charge of that section. So they were still kind of the public facing person. They weren't the dev who's actually working on it, but it's their group that handles that part of the algorithm or part of the company. So let's just jump right in. So this was the first slide I saw. I actually saw this slide, and you can see there's the head in the center of the center.
Yeah,
And this is being
that's Gary. I can already tell.
yes, yeah, that's Gary. And I made sure I didn't cut him out because I want everybody to see him there. He's the one who's presenting. Um, he So this was the first slide I saw. I actually saw this from a LinkedIn post. And the second I saw this, I was like, okay, interesting. And I was like, wait, what did I just see? And I scrolled back and I'm like, huh. Now I was looking at an article a couple weeks ago, at least, maybe even almost a month ago, where they put a red check mark over the hreflang tags box. So I don't know if in the presentation Gary said, "Oh, we have an X over hreflangs," and that's not true, or was the person saying, I couldn't find any context, and then last night looking around, I couldn't find the article I saw. So just a little note about hreflang. So I kind of want to talk through these if you guys would like to, like some things that they say are indexing signals or not. Now, we're talking about indexation. We're not talking about crawling. We're not talking about ranking. We're not talking about serving. If everybody remembers, and I think I left this on here. So there are several stages to Google's process. There's crawling, and there's both a refresh and discovery crawl. There's the index, which actually puts it in its database to be ranked and served. And then there's ranking, and then there's serving. We're going to be talking about all these things. Google did have some things they talked about. So this
And
is just about,
My,
yeah,
my
go.
my understanding of the indexing is this is where Google is going to determine if you are included or excluded in the primary index. All right. So people often refer to awareness. I can find the URL in search, but that's not the same thing because when you do that, it can pull that result from the supplemental indexes. And that doesn't mean your page is findable by the public. Um, so yeah, and don't think of this as ranking factors. Think of this as inclusion factors.
Exactly. So if you'll say, so here's an example. I have a client right now, and when you search their brand name, their site does not come up. Now, I can do a site colon command and find their domain in Google's index. Now, you could call that a ranking or serving issue. It might be. I suspect right now it's some type of indexation issue.
Yeah, if you're
But
not in the primary index, you aren't findable to the general population.
right, but
So yeah,
how
if you
would you
can.
test that, Ted? Because I know how I would test it, but so a site colon command doesn't tell you whether you're in this
No,
primary index or not.
the second you use any special modifiers, you're drawing from the supplemental
Yeah.
index, which is far bigger, far slower, not in cache. It's more expensive to Google, but it's not the same thing as you typed in a keyword and you appeared somewhere for that keyword. That's primary. And so you'd have to find the page with just a keyword, no special operators, and that would be the evidence of primary inclusion.
Exactly. One of the things I've done, and Ted, tell me if I'm going down the right path or not, but one of the things I've done to try to figure out whether I'm in the primary, secondary index is I'll do a search for the entire title tag or a large chunk of the page. So technically it's ranking, but it's it's an exact match basically, as opposed to, hey, this page is about,
Uh,
Google, or this page is about SEO Fight Club.
you have to be careful if it's quoted, it's a bad test.
Okay.
So you have to win it on broad match.
Okay. But if it's quoted, does that mean could be still in the secondary, you're saying? Or
Yeah, because
yeah.
there are states where you can appear for quoted and not for broad match, and there are states where you could appear for broad match but not for quoted. So quoted is kind of its own little subsystem.
Yeah.
So it's not as useful diagnostically.
Cool. So let's kind of go through these if you guys would like to, and talk about what are indexation signals or not, meaning will Google keep you? And that now, again, not being there and not having any context around this line, when they, we talked about this, we've talked about this many times. What are the problem with words is they could mean different things to different people. When they say something is index, do they mean primary index, secondary index? Do they even really have a primary and secondary index? Do they not think of it in those terms because there's some other process? They're looking at it from a very, very technical standpoint.
Well,
I'm taking this from being you are in Google's, you are not one of these crawled, not discovered. So if you think about Search Console, we've got was it crawled not or discovered not crawled, and we have crawled not indexed. Those two, Google knows about them and has them in a list someplace, but it's not what they would consider their index.
yeah, and basically the feeling I've gotten from trying to diagnose, how this inclusion exclusion all works is that it feels like every kind of search, every special operator, quoted search, broad match has its own index of how it searches that special case. And you can be included and excluded in any of them for whatever reasons Google sees fit. So there's no guarantee that you appear in all the special indexes. And then there's this thing called the supplemental index, which is Google's database of everything. But being in the database of everything does not mean you're findable in search. And so you got to be careful about saying, oh, I found my URL in Google, therefore I'm indexed. Not necessarily. You might not be findable. So yeah, if you're findable only with a site operator, nobody's gonna find you.
Right. Right. Then now the question is, does Google consider that indexed or not in the conversation about this slide? I'm I'm hesitant, but I want to say probably. They would probably consider that part of the index, but I don't know. I don't know. So domain age and history, they say that is not an indexing signal. So if I get an old domain that's been around forever, that just having that domain does not mean I'm going to be indexed. Country. So
Wait.
yeah,
So let's just, because I find a lot of these when I'm scanned through this list, there's some other context around this, and this is where things can get, slippery.
yeah.
So the domain age and history is not an index. So what about with an expired domain when reactivate it? We know that those tend to get crawled a little more aggressively than if I bought a brand new domain and started to put up, the similar or same content. So are they saying in and of itself, all of the things being equal, or does that come into play when, an expired domain is, revived? Because the
So
history of it
it's
does help
funny
it
you
get
should
crawled.
ask that. It's funny you should ask that, Lee. I'm running tests right now on expired domains. What I have found is when I revive a domain, Google does seem to come back and recheck it or recrawl URLs that it's aware of. It does not necessarily index those URLs. As a matter of fact, I've had to put a bit of work. And when I say a bit of work, making sure there's content on the page, yada yada, to make sure the page actually gets indexed by Google, meaning is included and shows up when I do a site colon command or when I do some kind of exact match search that I'm going to find my domain. Just having the domain live, the pages, so there are pages that are dead right now, they don't show up in Google's index.
Hmm.
Google hits them with a 404 and doesn't come back.
Interesting.
Now, we'll get to that in a few, and we might as well talk about it right now. Yeah, well, no, we'll get to that in a few.
All right.
So yeah,
On this slide,
yeah.
I have some concerns already. Um, all right.
As do we
So
all.
structured data, they say is a no.
For
But
indexing.
here's the problem. Nothing but schema can not only get you indexed, but get you ranked. So there's
So yeah, I know where you're going with this, Ted. I'm going to say so. Structured data can help with ranking, but this isn't about ranking. This is purely about indexing,
yeah, but the nothing but schema pages are just schema and a title tag. That's all they are.
right?
And so they get indexed. They're findable. Clint and Terry's pages are findable in the primary index.
But do those pages have other signals that Google's using for the indexing? And it's just not, yes, it has the structured data, but it doesn't have all these other signals.
Um, all right, so we're in a very fuzzy area on
Yes.
structured data already. All right, here's another thing. Sitemaps don't matter. Why do they have a whole subsystem in Search Console for them?
I would say that's for, and again,
Crawling?
without having been there, so I don't know exactly. I would say it's for crawling and discovery, not for indexation. So they'll
Okay.
discover you. So I've also done tests with sitemaps, trying to get more things crawled and indexed. I am getting stuff crawled, but I'm not necessarily getting them indexed. I cannot find them in the index, even when I do site colon commands. But I
Yeah.
know the pages are getting crawled because I have GSC set up and I can see, and I have logs and I can see they're getting crawled.
All
See,
right.
that's where I was saying earlier. This is slippery because like the
Yeah.
XML sitemap, I'm looking at that and going, no, no, actually that's for discoverability. It's not, it's like we found the URL. That doesn't necessarily mean we're gonna, index it. It's not a signal to index it, but it is getting it found. So okay,
And
maybe I
then
can buy that.
there's a very important omission on this list, which is no follow links. I noticed they were no comment on those.
I also, and since we're just jumping deeper in the list, I'm happy to. One of the things I noticed, and I didn't bring it up, when they say no, hreflang tags or not, but like I said, I'll have to find someplace somebody had a green check over it. So I wonder if this was a bad slide, and maybe Gary just kind of, talk tracked and said, oh yeah, hreflangs are. Notice canonical links are not in this list anyplace.
Mm.
Yeah,
It's,
and
it's completely. If hreflang is in here, I would assume canonical should be in here. And if hreflang is one, because I know it acts like a super canonical, does that mean canonicals are one as well? I'm sorry, Terry, you were saying something. I think I heard you say.
Two things. One, is this perhaps a slide previous to some changes then from those X's to checks? Like this is the way it was, now it's another way, you know what I'm saying? Or
So
also,
Mhm.
it looks as if we make sure we are violating spam policies, we will get indexed. Is that what that's saying?
I'm pretty sure it means spam policy violations will affect indexing. They're just saying, is this a signal, not will it
How
get
is it
you
a
indexed?
positive signal?
Yeah,
Some of
it's
these could
not a
be negative
positive.
signals.
Yes,
No, I don't
signals
think.
are bi-directional.
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
and yeah, pages that have been penalized by Google still pass rank.
Yeah.
So they're still in the ranking system.
Yeah.
There's still, so again, that goes back to what does Google mean when they say something's indexed? Um, and we know, and I've done the presentations in the past where I'm looking at Search Console, I can see something that's discovered, not crawled, crawled, not indexed. Well, if they've got a list, if Search Console's giving me a list of URLs, in my mind, that's some kind of index. Like that's a list.
Yeah,
Like that's the definition of
There-
an index, a list of
There's something
URLs.
else. There's something else we got to keep in mind here. Like I'm looking at the HTTPS thing, and I'm like, there's HTTP pages, that index.
Mhm.
So the fact that it's a signal doesn't necessarily mean it's 100 or 0. It can be it
Yeah.
can go towards your indexability score, because I'm also looking at like crawlability, and I'm like, wait, you telling me if you can't crawl my page, you could still index it?
I'm
yeah, that
wondering. So,
one.
so that one bugged me because one of the things I thought when looking at this list, I think I put it into my next. I don't put it in the next slide. I put it in. Oh, I didn't put a wrap up. I didn't put a wrap up there. These all seem to be very technical items, and crawlability, in my mind, that's a technical item. However, my thought, Lee, is that if it's not crawlable, then it's not even going to get to this stage. So that's why it's not an indexing factor. Either they can crawl you or they can't. If they can crawl you, you get to this stage. And so crawlability isn't an issue. If they can't crawl you, then you don't even get to this stage. That's my thought, but I'm totally just kind of
Yeah,
guessing here as to
that's one of those slippery fucking, that's like, oh, that's the other guy's department. It doesn't get here if it's like,
Yeah. Well, that's all keep in mind. This is still a Google slide in front of people. So there's
yeah,
going to be half truths and and innuendos and intentional misstatements and some. They can't outright lie because there's probably legal issues when it comes to doing that, but they don't have to explain the whole story.
yeah.
Yeah, and we know from like the whole rhinoplasty plano thing, which still works today. Readability, yeah, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have
Um,
confirmed one. That's confirmed, in our
I,
and
I I like the logical internal linking is not an indexing factor. What do they mean by logical internal link? And do they see illogical internal linking? Like
there,
that begs
there,
a question.
I see that, and I think they're looking at siloing and content links, but we know those help with ranking.
Yeah,
They're just saying they don't help with indexing.
right. Again, think everyone kind of keep this slide and this list kind of in your mind. There's crawling, indexing, ranking, and serving. Um, so yeah, something could help with ranking, but still keep you from being served
Yeah,
for one
these
reason
could
or another.
all be ranking factors, but only some of them are indexing factors.
Yeah,
Mhm.
they could all be ranking factors. They could be ranking, they could be crawling. So if you think of factors, there's crawling factors, there's indexing factors, there's ranking factors, and then there's things that'll affect whether you get served or not. I think those are more filters than factors, but regardless, some of these could be
Yeah.
on all the list. So your language could be an indexing factor and a serving factor. Because if you're in, let's just say Spanish and it's, Quebec, Canada, they're not going to serve you.
Well, and the other thing I noticed, from years ago, that page speed and page weight are kind of like serving factors because they determine whether or not your website will appear on the 3G mobile connection from the ferry boat. Because if it's not going to work with that connection, then why even show that result? And so when I would check rankings from the ferry boat, my rankings were awesome. I think I had won the battle. But then I'd get into the corporate office and my rankings would go back to what they were. And it was all because of that serving layer and certain things being filtered. And so that's how I realized that page speed was a filter, not a factor. Page speed didn't change my rankings up or down, but it changed which searches I could appear in. And so when page speed is bad, you appear at the same ranking, but for fewer searches. You lose those 3G, slow connections.
And I can't help but notice page speed is not in this list.
I think they glom it into Core Web Vitals.
I was gonna say if Core Web Vitals are in here, I was gonna say I would be at least cognizant of page speed.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
do they so my question when I see something like that is so like canonical tags aren't on the list, page speed isn't on the list. In their mind, does that mean it's part of something else? Or it's
yeah,
not even worth talking about because they just assume that you're doing it?
I would simplify Core Web Vitals down to two things, just page speed and page weight. If you have a 36 megabyte hero image, that's going to be a very heavy page. You need to fix that because that doesn't work well for somebody who's on a mobile phone at the bus stop. So you got to think of, you got to build all of your websites with the guy that's on a mobile phone at the bus stop. That's the person you develop for. That's your lowest common denominator. And if you support that person well, then you support everybody else even better.
Yeah, I
And
can I can tell you that a few years ago it was our own Terry Power who was testing image size, and a variety of things. And he had one image that's the size of a fucking billboard. I think is what it was. It was huge. He was trying to test, that sort of thing. And it was interesting to the pages that he had loaded really fucking slow. That's all I'm gonna say.
So one thing I found interesting in here in regards to the links and I know they were specifically say do follow links, which I find hilarious because there is no do follow. It's either no follow or nothing. But even Google's using the mistaken nomenclature. But um, so a something I have seen in all my testing and all my messing around with things is I can get pages indexed. I can do a site colon command. I can do multiple different things and find a page in Google's index. But then after a couple of months, I often see things drop off. It's not uncommon at all to see things drop off. And I wonder if that's where, and I've heard folks have said this to me in the past, but I wonder if that's where the links are important, where Google says, okay, we'll index you. But if you don't get some links, we're not going to keep you indexed. I notice they don't mention traffic in here in any way, shape, or form. Does that mean traffic is not an indexing factor in any way, shape, or form? Or do they just not like talking about traffic?
Yeah, it's
They don't want to
interesting
bring it
because
up.
we had noticed that. I mean, it's one of the reasons why we built the simple link tool was because we had noticed in looking at sites, you could at certain points in time when Google's struggling to index things, when you hear people complaining about it, you could almost see sites that had pages on your site that had external links. Those pages were indexed. The ones that had no external links were not indexed, and we're like, okay, so we've got to at least get one link to each one of those pages. And I have some testing data right now that sort of indicates that, yeah, this may come into play because I've had, Charles knows about, a couple of the tests that I ran. I ran one batch of pages through and they had do follow links and, there were crap pages, but 78% of them got indexed. And then ones that didn't have the link to them, 18% got indexed. same style page. So, there is precedent for saying that links do matter in the indexation world.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, go ahead.
oh, I was going to say, just because link velocity isn't a indexation factor doesn't mean you can use whatever velocity you want, because there's going to be a penalty phase that isn't even on that chart that's going to say, oh, your link velocity is too high, therefore you don't appear.
Yes.
Um, and so, some of these things they say they're not using can still be the reason why you're not finding your page in search.
And again, to repeat for folks that either missed it or have come into this webinar kind of late, these are indexing signals. According to Google, these are indexing. These are not crawling or discovery signals. They're not ranking or serving signals. This just determines whether they're willing to index the page. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say this probably also whether they keep indexing the page. Because they can initially index a page, but do they keep the page indexed? So my guess would be the do follow links and the content recency and freshness may be factors in whether they keep the page indexed. With
And
that said, I've got pages that I haven't changed, and they had one good link 3 years ago, and they're still in the index.
I think
So
human traffic is probably something they left off this list on purpose.
yeah.
Because I think pages with logged in Google users, those page views are probably a good indication that they want to keep that page alive.
Yeah.
So something's bugging me. Let's go through the first two green check marks, country and language, because usually those appear at the very top of your HTML.
Yeah, it's not in my country, so I can't go there. It's not in my language, so I can't read the page.
So
It's
does
the
that mean you're not?
translate this demotion.
Yeah, but does that mean that you are like if the country code was Spain or something like that, that it's not going to index in the US,
Yeah, because
version or
they have multiple primary indexes based on country and language.
Mhm.
So, you just because you're findable in English in the primary index doesn't mean you're findable in the Spanish primary index. So, they're separate concerns.
Yeah, we see those with Google with update rollouts. Google will announce, oh, we updated something for the US, and then they'll come out a month later. Oh, we've run this update for the entire world or Europe or
Right.
Asia or something like that. So yeah, to your point, Lee, I think these are indexing signals specific for the Google
Yeah,
index. So for
which
the
index?
Australia,
Yeah,
for the
which Google you're in?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, which index is what
Yeah.
those are signaling.
And they were in Thailand.
And
Mhm.
they were in Thailand, yeah. So if you want to show up in the Thailand, I don't know how to pronounce, I don't Thailandese, I don't know. If you're in the Thailand index, then you'd want to have your country and language set to whatever they speak in Thailand. I apologize to everybody in
Thai.
Thailand. I know nothing about Thai. Okay,
It's
I know
all
nothing about
Thai.
your country or your culture or
You're
anything.
in the Thai index, you speak Thai.
You speak Thai, okay.
Yeah.
Um,
Um,
Interesting. I find HTTPS and secure site. I had seen in the past, Google came out and said this isn't a ranking factor. All they do, according to Google, and this is a statement I heard them say years ago, is they just want to see if the page resolves as HTTPS. If it does, that's it. They're not actually seeing whether it's secure. But I noticed here they have HTTPS/secure site. So I don't know if they just thought they needed to clarify that, or has Google changed and they are actually checking to see if the site is secure, as opposed to just resolving as HTTPS. And again,
um,
that's years and years ago. I've heard that statement.
y- yeah, I would say it's probably a typo, and they probably meant HTTPS and secure site. because you can be HTTPS, but you could still include non-HTTPS scripts and images that would make it an insecure site.
Right.
So you would have to, have both the certificate and only include secure assets.
This goes into the whole when Google does a slide or says something, sometimes they're just not real clear. And I think they do that intentionally because they don't want to give too much away. Uh,
And
the content recency and freshness was really the only line they had here that talked about anything about the content of the page. So like even structured data or topical authority or I know, Lee and I have been doing some testing on what will get a page indexed and he and I focused a lot on topics, the topic of the page. And I've
Well,
heard a lot of people say the topic of the page determines whether you'll get indexed or not.
here's
According to
a
Google, they're saying no.
here's a question about this. What's the difference between content recency and freshness?
Hmm, it's a good question.
I mean, the fact that they made a distinction there, maybe that means something. Maybe it's just brain noise.
Yeah.
Well,
you
one
could have
could be.
posted yesterday. You could have posted yesterday. This is the anniversary of Queen Elizabeth's death. That's not fresh, but it's recent. I mean, it's not recent, but it's fresh. You know what I'm saying? It's just a refreshment of something that's already been out there, kind of thing. But do we know, is this, you have to have at least one of these to get indexed, or you need all of these that are checked, or what, a certain combination of them will get you indexed and a certain combination won't?
There's only so
Yeah.
much room, and the top scoring pages get included, and the ones that didn't score enough to be in the allocation aren't included. And we'd see that with our test pages because, they were always on the fringe of that inclusion scoring and they'd fall out fast because they were at the bottom. So yeah, you probably more is probably better. Diversity is probably something that'll help you.
Well, you
Yeah,
could
my
also have recency and freshness. One might be a page signal, one might be a site signal. It could be redundancy, or it could refer to something that Charles was talking about earlier, which is, okay, we'll index you today, but if certain things aren't met in the next, 3 months, that page could fall out of the index because of that. Because, when you type in uh, NFL football score, they're assuming that you mean, yesterday's games or recent games. They're not assuming that you mean the 1972 Jets Packers matchup in November. So there is some types of topics that are very date dependent. News is particularly prone to this. So, Charles, when you looked at things like that, did you see that in certain instances the older content did drop out of the index, or did it never because Fox was so large nothing ever leaves?
so yeah, that's a good point. I was just going to jump into that. So the short answer is when I did a test, I wanted to do a test on the removal tool. I had a lot of trouble finding a page that was more than 6 or 7 months old. I think maybe I went 8 months old. I went pretty far back because I didn't want to mess anything up. That was in the index. That
Okay.
when I did a site colon command, I found it. And I finally found a sports article, and I don't remember what the subject matter was about, but it was in the index and it was at least 8 months old. I'm like, okay, let me try doing a removal. Because what I was doing is I did a removal and then I watched the log files to see, does Google check? Does Google ever come back? And that's when I found out that the removal tool, it takes it out of the index and it doesn't come back for a while. So yeah, their content freshness, recency and freshness seems to be pretty strong. But again, we're talking about a news site. If Google knows that something's a news site or
Mhm.
knows the topic is news, and you do searches for the president, you're probably not going to find anything about, George W. Bush or Obama because that's been too long ago now. That's, you might even have trouble finding things about Biden because that's been what, over 8 months, over 9 months now. So that's not recent or fresh. Um, and Google knows that they're newsworthy topics.
And spam policies violations is also an interesting one because keyword stuffing to this day is a manual action. So why didn't he talk about manual actions in Search Console? Because most of those are enforced via manual actions. So it's interesting that he didn't say spam policies and violations and manual actions. He clarified multiple names elsewhere, but not here. So I find that interesting too. So yeah, if you get a manual action applied to you, you probably won't be indexed until you do your reconsideration requests. Um, but yeah, they leave it very ambiguous in the way they presented that information here.
Yeah,
I also
well, go
I
ahead.
found it interesting. So my first thing I would say is, as far as I think that's one of the things they felt like we just have to throw that in there. If you make us mad, we'll take you out of the index, kind of like that
Well,
boogeyman kind of thing.
and it's true, but they're hiding the true mechanism, which is
Yes, oh
a
for sure.
manual action in Google Search Console is probably what they're talking about there.
Okay,
I also
well,
have a thing where I have to count. I just that's just a thing I do, and I couldn't help but notice that each column was 10 exactly.
mhm.
It's like, well, clearly this is an arbitrary list. Someone said, let's come up with 20. And they sat around a table and came up with 20. I'm sure there's a lot more than 20 factors. Um,
Yeah.
they probably figured that these are the ones that they get questions about or they see people talk about, or maybe they even got some input from some folks in the
And
SEO shill industry that.
Yeah, I'm gonna say the spam policy violations, that's one I would call bullshit on entirely because we have built pages and we have chronicled pages that we track that are, in the index and ranking for terms for years and years and years. And so every time Google announces a spam policy update, I'm like, all right, let me go to my rank checker and check. And no, none of my spam pages have been impacted, in the least. And we're talking about things that are, on par with, lorem ipsum type pages that have no redeeming value whatsoever, but they rank
yeah,
well.
and and we currently can't get SEO test pages into the primary index for testing without including entities.
Yeah.
And if you think about the rhinoplasty plano pages, they're all lorem ipsum and SEO paint by numbers, the right words in the right zones. So saying topical authority isn't part of it either is suspect.
Right.
Um,
Plus, those that have been around and heard me talk about a variety of these different topics, I will tell you that Google's, what do they call now? Their search essentials. If you go to the spam policies page and look at all the things that constitute spam, I have tested most of those and can tell you right now that there are a bazillion pages out there that actively violate every one of these, and a lot of them are mine. Not that I have billions of pages, but I violated most of the policies across the board, and those pages are indexed and ranking. So this is one where I think this is like, well, and don't violate spam policies, or you won't get indexed. And I'm like, horse shit.
well, I think it's true in the sense of manual actions. If they
Yeah,
manually penalize you for those violations, you won't be indexed. But they don't tell you that. They don't tell you that it's a manual action and Search Console as part of the consideration.
right. Because that you're right about that. Because when Kyle did the rhinoplasty plano, they manually took that one down, but then he started
Not
just
the
building.
other eight.
Yeah, the other ones in the other cities are like, we're fine, and they were basically identical to the first one. So, it's not that the algorithm is doing this. You have to have a manual to make that work. So I think that's a scare tactic.
I would agree. I
Too
think
much,
I think it's
too much data on
again
the other side.
yeah, and it's at the end, and it's like, okay, we gotta throw this. Someone they sat down and said we have to have a list, and they probably maybe they said 25, and someone pointed out we can't make a nice slide with 25, so okay, let's do 20, or they said 15, and like, oh, it's uneven, we got to come up with 20, and so there's having worked for enterprise organizations, I can already see the whole conversation that went into building this deck. I bet there
Mhm.
was a big old conversation about what to put in there, what not to put in there. Um,
Yeah,
or
this.
someone was left, or and then the other side is someone was told, I want you to come up with an indexing slide, have like 20 or so items in there, and then we'll talk about it later. And then the person just had to come up with a bunch of things that they thought made sense. So there could be big things in here that just aren't included because it's just not important enough for Google to say, like canonical tag or page speed. They
Well,
just didn't think it was important enough to discuss.
some of these are a little strange for inclusion, like matching search intent, because at the time of indexation, there is no search. There's no keyword at that decision time to include or exclude a page.
Yeah.
So search intent couldn't possibly be a consideration for indexation.
Yeah, I was going to go down a similar thing. I was going to say, you hear Google's mantras, write for humans, do good content, natural links, don't violate our spam policies. But if you actually look at the checklist here, minus the spam policies, it's like country, language, HTTPS, core web vitals, do follow links, content recency. That basically says, your technical isn't screwing up. That's
Yeah.
all that this says.
That's really what I got out of this. I got that your technical's not screwing up. And then one of the other things that kind of hit me, and I didn't think much about it. I didn't bring it up yet because I figured it was late when I was looking at this last night. If you look at this list and put it in an ordered list, it almost looks like a checklist that Google would go through when they're crawling your site. First, you check the domain and age. Then you check the country. Then you check the language. Then you check the structured data. Then you see, was it like they don't get to content and keywords and spam until almost the end of the list.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it could have nothing to do with anything. It could just be the person who sat down. There's a list of things that they thought was worth talking about, and they went through the Google list and they decided, well, let me stick other things in the list. So there may not, I could be, reading tea leaves here that just there's nothing to see. But I just found it interesting. The list, the order of this list, I found interesting too. It's not just the number, but the order I found interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the primary index is much, much smaller than the supplemental index. And so either you have enough indexation score to be included in that much smaller sample, or you don't. So it's still a stack ranking, but you have to think about this concept of indexation score. And the way you probably want to think about it is the minimum SEO you apply on a site across all the pages. Because if you don't have that minimum amount, then you're going to have pages that won't be in the primary index. So you want to have a plan for your minimum threshold of SEO that you deliver that kind of, meets this indexing score requirement. Otherwise, you're putting out pages people will never see.
Agreed.
Pretty cool.
So yeah, so this is the list. I'm going to have other slides and other decks, and I'm going to read up some things that people say were said. I'm always very, very cautious about when people report on things because unless it's a recording, the human memory is horrible, and I know mine is horrible. A lot of folks don't believe how their memories as bad as they are. I know, like for example, when you talk about a court of law, eyewitness is amazingly unreliable. They've done test after test on that, so I'm always very, very hesitant, and that's why I would recommend anyone be hesitant on things you hear people say about something. Oh, Google said this, or Google talked about that. Google may or may not have. That's why I want to mention that someone did put a green check mark over the hreflang, but I don't remember where. I can't find the slide where it had that, and I don't know the context. So does that mean that Google kind of, Gary's like, oh yeah, this is, and we just messed it up? which again is very possible. They just had to throw this. Again, looking at the deck, again, I like to look at weird things. You'll notice that the check boxes and the X's aren't lined up real nicely. So that tells me one of two things. This was done quickly and or it was done by somebody who is not a design person. They're a technical person.
And
It's not someone who makes decks for a living.
And if you need a trick to finding the pages on your website that are in desperate need of help, you want to go into Google Analytics and you want to find all the pages that have zero site entries from Google Organic in the past 30 days. And when you go to make that custom report, just know you need to include impressions to even get the zeros to appear. It's kind of a little bit tricky to get that data. And we have an episode from the previous version of analytics where I show you how to make the reports. The system's all different, but still the things you're after are in there. And we call that episode the goose egg SEO. Because if you're not in the primary index, you're not going to see any site entries from Google Organic. And I'm using very specific language here on what you need those reports to show.
So I think one of my takeaways from this is that indexation seems to be more about the content of I'm sorry, not the content. It's not about the content of the page. It's more about the code and the structure of the page than it is about the content of the page or the topic of the page. Other than the recency and freshness, I think a great way to test this, and a few things I'm thinking of right now are I go into Search Console and I look at my pages that show crawled not indexed, and then start reviewing those pages against this list and say, okay, do I have a country and language defined? What about my, is it really a secure page? How are the core web vitals? Do I have do follow links on this? Is there recent content and or fresh content? Spam policies, again, I'm not so sure about this. I would still look at my hreflang and canonical tags, make sure that they're correct. I'd actually make sure most of this stuff is correct. But in terms of just can I move something from the crawled not indexed to the indexed by going through these items in this list? It seems like a small list, and to me, it doesn't seem like any of these should be powerful enough, other than maybe the links should be powerful enough to move something from crawled not indexed to indexed. Let's see here. I think that's really the only slide. Yeah, so we already discussed questions. As always, folks are struggling with issues, you can always reach out to me. I will warn you, I'm taking fewer and fewer people. I've just been too darn busy lately. But if somebody has an issue, you can always reach out to me. I'm always happy to give everybody, 15, 20 minutes time. Everyone's going to get at least 15, 20 free out of me. And if I can help you, great. If I can't, I may not have time to help you, or I may not be able to help you with this stuff. If I can, I'll just say, hey, I'm sorry, I can't help you. So there will be more of these coming. I've gone through
Awesome.
all the decks. I've actually, in my research over the last day or two, I found there are pictures of slides that aren't in. There was an article that I thought had every slide in it. It clearly did not. There are other slides. So I might even go a little crazy and try to rebuild the deck. I don't know if that's worth time and energy, but
Well,
could I rebuild this deck with all the slides of all the pictures and get a better sense of what was out there? And so far as I know, there's no recording of this. If anyone's aware of a recording of this, either official or bootleg, let me know. I would love to see a recording of this because some of these slides I really feel need context.
yeah, and Gary has delivered a number of leaks, so he is a repeat leaker. He's also the gatekeeper on what gets leaked. So when I saw Paul Har speak, who's an engineer on the search team, and I said, and this was way back when it was brand new, and I was like, "Hey, are you guys using?" Open Graph is part of your ranking system. Paul Har looked to Gary. Gary gave him the nod, and then Paul turned back to me and said, yes. So that's that relationship between the engineers and what gets leaked. And things like protocol buffers and comparable fingerprints, a lot of very cool things have been leaked by Gary. Let's see, questions. All right. For best ranking, should I use classic pagination with next page, etc., or use infinite scroll? I think the safest implementation is to use rel next prev and the next page, previous page links, because Google's going to follow those links, and it's very obvious what they are. There's a ton of ways to implement infinite scroll, and some of them Google can engage, and some of them Google can't. I do know that Googlebot will try to trigger a lot of lazy load content by having a 12,000 pixel tall viewport. But if that's not how your infinite scroll is implemented, then you may not get that content seen. And if there's more than 12,000 pixels of content, well, that's all you're going to get because that's all they're going to lazy load trigger. So keep that in mind. Any thoughts on that?
No.
All right. Yeah, I think pagination gets you a lot more content per category discovered. Just don't misuse the canonical tag. Don't canonicalize page 4 to page 1. They have different products on them, therefore their content is different. They should canonicalize to themselves. Otherwise, you're just teaching Google to not trust your canonicals. How do I form an SEO strategy? Does it depend if it's e-com or not? And can you give examples of the most common strategies? Well, typically what happens is there are things that work for you and things that don't. And typically your strategy is to use all the things that work, and then you probably listen to some talking heads on YouTube and you trust them or you don't, and you try the things they say. Uh, but typically, what you can prove for yourself is going to be the best strategy. And the more things you test and prove for yourself, then you don't have to trust someone like me. If you proved it for yourself, that can never be taken away. And if somebody says something that violates what you have proven for yourself, then you know not to listen to that person.
Mhm.
So ultimately, your toolbox is going to be filled of things you know to be true. And so that means you got to test. And if you don't test, then you're just guessing at who to listen to.
Mhm.
I would add to that, Ted, and this kind of goes to the next question that somebody else asked. So number one, I agree 100%. Don't listen to anyone. Don't listen to me. Test things out on your own. Don't take what I say as gospel because I could be wrong. I've been wrong, as surprising as that may seem. I would also suggest that if you don't have time to test, or you're like, how do I test? How do I test? You actually have already tested, but you don't know. If you have a website and it's been going for more than a couple of years, you can look at the data. And if somebody says that uh, uh, country and language is an indexing factor, and you have all of your pages, none of them have country or index or language set, and they're all indexed, okay, maybe it is still an indexing factor, but it clearly isn't super powerful. So you can use your own data to come to decisions and make some informed decisions, or at least be able to give yourself an easier thing to test and say, okay, well, again, something simple. I'm going to take 100 pages out of my crawled not indexed, throw country and language in there. Let's see if they get magically indexed. If they do, well, okay, it's a powerful signal. If they don't, okay, maybe it's not. Is that a true test? Would Mr. Witcher have a problem with some of the controls? I have no doubt. He'll beat up on me all the time about my tests. But you can learn things, and that's the key. And that's I'm sorry, I'm passionate about this because 10 or so years ago, I almost got out of the industry. I said, I don't think we're doing anything. I started getting really suspicious, and maybe a little more than 10, but I started getting really suspicious that SEO was doing things, and I asked myself, maybe I'm just lucky. Maybe, and I don't know I'm lucky. Maybe I just always happened to be in charge of a website that was going up, and I thought it was me, but it wasn't me. When I learned testing, I learned that nope, I can actually determine whether something goes up or down. I can actually understand. Does it mean you're perfect? No, but you can know these things. Sorry,
Yeah,
Tim.
I'm gonna jump
Mini
on this
rant.
one because multiple times Charles has said to me, "Hey, I heard you say this. I went and tested it." I'm like, "You don't trust me, you bastard," But it's true. And Charles and I have been testing some things on indexation and whatever. And just last week, I had a test that I put out there. Charles called his shot. I called my shot. We were both wrong.
Very wrong. We were
Very,
both very
very wrong.
wrong.
And it's kind of the nature of the beast. So and we knew going into it, we had somewhat firm leanings, but we both were very, very well aware that we could be wrong. We still felt like we had good logic, and our good logic was for naught. I
And
will say this.
here's a great lesson for that. I'm sorry, Lee. I'm just going to
Yeah, go ahead.
so I did another test and I said, oh, this is going to index at 20%, and this is going to index at 75 plus. And I was like totally wrong. They both index at like 90%. And that was based off of knowledge from somebody who I have a lot of trust and faith in, someone who I know is a very smart person. I'm like, okay, I'm not saying they're wrong, but there's something else going on, or the definition of indexing, or maybe it's not get in the index, but stay in the index. There's more to this than we realized. And after having seen this slide, I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to take a step back and rethink how I test these things, because I know what I've seen, and I totally trust what other people have said, but I have to see it for myself and I have to prove it for myself before I'm confident that I understand what I'm saying.
So when I look at this question of how do I form an SEO strategy, I'll tell you um, what I see that most people do, and I'll tell you what actually works in my experience. What I see most people do, I interviewed a whole bunch of people before a presentation I did in January, and I said, "Hey, Charles, you got this site, and it's they got a brand new website, new clients coming to you, they got a brand new website, and it's good. And you've looked at technical or no technical issues. It's time to begin the SEO. What do you do?" And every person described their process for SEO, and it was always the thing that they like to do. So content people say, well, of course, we get some new content going, or we look at a content gap analysis. Schema people say, well, the first thing we do is we got to make sure that schema is, and links people, like, first thing we got to do is the link stuff. Nobody looked to ask the question, what does the site need? So I've had too many conversations with SEOs who have said things like, I use these tools, I optimize these pages, my internal linking is on point, Google hates my site, something. And I'll go take a look and I'll go, dude, you have 0 backlinks. You can keep optimizing your content till the cows come home, and unless you get some backlinks, that Google's not going to reward you for all of your fine work. And so a lot of times the key in SEO and developing the strategy is to look at, what is it that's missing from the puzzle, not what's your favorite thing to do. And sometimes that's links, sometimes it's on page, sometimes it's technical. And so, the strategy always depends on what's missing from the site, or where are you at a competitive disadvantage. And so that's one of the keys to developing the strategy, is to be able to look at that. But too many times people look at it through the lens of their favorite thing to do. And that's where I see flaws, and SEOs will get stuck because I keep trying my content thing, or I keep trying my links thing, or I keep trying my schema thing, and it's not working. Google hates me. It's like, no, you have other deficits that you're not addressing.
And keep in mind, peer review is awesome. Terry Samuels discovered nothing but schema. Then Clint repeated the experiment and confirmed it, then I repeated Clint's experiment and confirmed that. And so, now we all have something that we've proven for ourselves and we know to be true, but you don't know it to be true. And that's why peer review is good, so repeat the experiment. The other thing on strategy, it's hard to argue with something that's working for you. So
Mhm.
if it's working for you, recognize that, make a note of it, and find other things that are working for you. And eventually, you will have a system of things that work for you. And that's a good strategy.
Yeah.
Test on the little site, recommend successes from the little site for the big site.
Mhm.
And examine what's working for your competitors that are above you.
Yep.
Steal from them. Always a good plan.
Yep.
All right, let's see. Next question. I am an SEO consultant at an agency. I have small kids at home that take up a lot of my time. This gives me very little time to test and really learn how to be an excellent SEO. You know, here's the truth. You have to prioritize, some time to actually learn your trade. So there can't always be an excuse to not improve your skills. So if it's important to you, you'll find some time. You'll talk to your spouse and say, hey, I need you to watch the kids on Saturday afternoons so that I can learn some skills. You just have to prioritize it. What do you think, Lee?
Yeah, I think that that's absolutely true because you're basically asking, I need time to learn this, but I don't have any time. So you have to carve out time. But what time you do have, the most efficient way of learning stuff is to, just focus on things that can improve what you're doing right now. So here's an example. If Charles is struggling to rank certain pages on his site, he might think, well, maybe I need schema. You know, you don't have to go and implement site wide every page thing. What he could do is just, get some schema written for 1 or 2 or 3 pages and put them on there, get the pages recrawled and see if anything happens. Does it move up or not? And those are fairly low. I mean, it's not, you're not testing off a wide variety of things. You're not trying to prove that schema works for everybody, but you can see if in your particular case, if that's the thing that's missing, if that's the thing that's going to move the needle for you in that particular situation. And that's valuable knowledge because if you put it on 3 pages and those 3 pages move up, then you have a recipe for attacking the rest of the pages on that site and maybe some other sites that you have as well. So that you can implement little tests in the things that you do just by saying, I think this may be a problem. So just think about it and structure it and go after that and get some results and confirm for yourself whether it in fact is, and then roll with it.
And keep in mind, playing devil's advocate here, uh, your small kids are only going to be small for a limited time, and you will definitely miss it when it's gone. So, it's also okay to say now isn't the time to invest a lot of time in learning new skills. Maybe you do that in a couple of years. That's okay too. You just got to recognize the choice and do your best with it.
Yeah.
Maybe convince your employer that 2 hours a week of you running tests would make you a better SEO consultant as part of their agency.
Mm-hmm.
Terry, you read my mind, buddy. I was thinking, I started thinking the same thing. Like I would have, if I were in his shoes or her shoes, whoever this is, I would approach my employer and say, so I watch this webinar weekly and they talk about testing. I think our agency would benefit from it. I'd like to lead a testing group internally. And we'll meet twice a week. We'll meet 1 hour on Tuesday and 1 hour on Friday. And on Tuesday, we're going to plan out our, and we're going to, the first half of the meeting is talking about results from the last tests. And then the next half of the meeting is talking about what we're going to test next. And then make an agenda, report it to your boss, because that's the kind of thing that they want to show their bosses. They want to be able to tell their bosses, look what my team is doing. They're doing this all by themselves. And there you go. Now you have the time. I would also suggest that, here, I'm going to say a naughty word here, budget. Are you using all of your time as efficiently as you think you are? I know I don't. I'll sit down and watch a show with my wife, and then 3 hours later, I'm scrolling around on YouTube while she's sleeping on the couch. And I'm like, you know what? This is not a good use of my time. I did that last night. I shut off, like, I've been sitting here for an hour and a half. That's a waste of my time. I turned it off and I went to I went to the computer and I did some work. I made this deck actually. But yeah, be very, you have to budget, just like money. You have to budget your money and you have to budget your time. If you don't have a lot of money, do you not eat? No, you still got to eat. If you don't have a lot of time, do you not spend it with your family? No, you have to spend it with your family. But there is some place where you're spending that time that probably is not the best use of your time.
Yeah.
But I would also say, look at your old data too, as I was saying
I'm also going to say, reading this question and the couple of pieces that follow, my guess is this person works out of home. And so, if you've got young kids and stuff like that, you are your employer and you sympathize with your employees' plight, but, got to take care of the kids and, got to get the client stuff done as well. So it's tough.
Let's see. The other thing to keep in mind is a lot of very talented SEOs would probably entertain a mentorship engagement where you pay them for a couple hours a month and they run some reports on your site and they talk about what you've done and what you could do next. And those types of mentorships are very educational and it's very little time. It does cost some money, and maybe you can get the business to pay for it. So keep that in mind. Let's see. How will you define URL will be indexed only if certain conditions are met? Well, one condition is that the URL exists. No point indexing a URL that's fictitious. Another thing is the web server has to work. So if the URL is real, but it pulls a 500 error, there's no point in indexing it.
Yeah.
So, we're starting from a place of conditions. And so it's just how many are there?
That message pops up in Search Console sometimes when you test a live URL, and it'll say, yeah, it's available to be indexed, but only if certain conditions are met. And typically that means, if it passes its other stuff that was on Charles's slide, for example, so it can look at it and says, yes, we can crawl this page and it will be indexed, provided that it meets all of our quality criteria, if you want to think of it that way.
And if it ever tells you it's not including your page for a specific reason, there's probably something wrong with the page, but Google is often incorrect about what the reason is. Yeah. So don't spend too much time if it's telling you that something specific is wrong and you're looking at the page going, no, that can't be the case. Then yeah, it's probably something else related to it, and Google's just telling you the wrong thing. What do you guys mean by getting served? Well, when somebody goes up and insults your ability to do breakdancing moves, well, you got served. What do you think it means, Charles?
I think Charles just left the show.
Yeah. You got me, Ted. I didn't see you coming with that one. Yeah, that caught me off guard. Yeah, no, actually, I see Jeff answers the question for in the chat as well. But yeah, there's different levels to what Google does, and serving is the last step. Google will say, "Hey, we're willing to rank you. You could rank number one, but we won't serve you because your page is in Spanish, and this person who's searching is searching in English, and so Google won't serve the page." Or they'll filter out the page because it's duplicate content. Or they'll filter out the page in Ted's example because it's too darn slow and you're on a 3G network somehow in 2025. But and they just won't serve you. So it's serving is a filter. It's not a factor. It's not something you can optimize. Well, I guess technically you can, but so yeah. We're going to talk a lot about this kind of stuff in the coming weeks. I've got many
Got many
slides.
slides. Many
Many
slides.
Can you guys recommend any AI LLM tracking tools? Will your new tool do this, Ted? Yes and no. It'll be capable of doing that, but it won't be an out of the box feature. You would have to instruct it to behave that way. So that's why it's a yes and no. It's an automation tool. It can automate a lot of things. It could automate that if you chose to make it do that. Um, but it is not a tool that's purpose for being is that. So that's the caveat. And I would turn this question over to Terry because he knows a lot more about the AI and LLM tool space than I do.
There's a there's a website, LLM Refs, REFS, that's its sole purpose, is to tell you what the LLMs are doing for you. It's free to use. And I say that meaning if there is a limit, I haven't found it, but often with the new tools, there's a limit. It's free until you abuse it. But there's a search bar there, and you type in and see what the various language models are aware of, finding, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of tools that do that. That's the one that's the most straightforward that I've found. You could go to each of the tools on their own and ask them about a particular URL or entity and see what they know about it if you wanted. But
All right. Do you guys ever worry about Google coming for you or your clients as a result of testing like they did for Kyle? Um, you know, the Kyle Roof thing, they took a certain way. So they took that as, making a mockery of Google. Now, right or wrong, I think what Kyle did was, one of the most relevant and impactful blog posts ever made. But Google saw it as web spam. And so, it beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So Google made an emotional response to the most impactful SEO blog post ever made. And so it wasn't a scientific response. It wasn't a security response. It wasn't an exploit response. They made an emotional response. They felt like idiots because of what Kyle did.
Mhm.
And they smacked Kyle down because they had feelings.
And I would say it wasn't even Kyle. Somebody wrote an article and said Kyle just showed that Google's crap, and no, they didn't say that, but they framed it in the way that they were showing how look what this guy did, and he just totally made fun of Google. And Kyle's point was like, hey, God, his point was not I can trick Google. His point was these words are more important, and Google is not reading. That's really his own point. It's like Google's not reading. It's the math behind the algorithm. Somebody saw that and decided I'm going to be internet famous. I'm going to write an article about it. And they had their clickbait title and everything. And to Ted's point, yeah, Google got upset about it and said, well, we have to put an end to this.
Yeah.
I would also say that none of us, well, I'm not saying none of us. I know myself, I can't do enough spam to make Google notice me. They've got such huge spammy networks they have to deal with on a day in, day out basis. There's nothing I'm going to do that's going to probably ever get their attention.
Yeah, but there are, I'm going to say there are public things like recently, not a few months back, Ted was part of an article that showed how Google is helping people buy cocaine, and I can't see that Google was probably flattered by the
No,
coverage.
they had a very emotional response to that too.
Right? But those sort of things that embarrass them publicly, yeah. But there's also things like if you think about all of the web spam tools, if you go put, Money Robot is available and it ranks well, GSA search engine ranker, all of these tools that are used to spam manipulate the Google algorithm, they still rank well within the algorithm. And if Google wanted to, it wouldn't take but a few minutes worth of work to take down all of those things, but they don't. So, unless you just publicly, and I think the article that was written about Kyle had something, the headline was something like SEO mocks Google or something like that, which is not what he did, but it certainly is going to get a lot of attention, and it got Google's attention and they weren't happy.
All right,
I've
let's.
brought spam, clear spam to Google people directly back in the days of enterprise, and they were amazingly unconcerned with what I showed them. I was shocked how unconcerned they were when I showed them the breadth of a problem I found. Um, but
Yeah, and am I worried that Google is coming for me? Not really. I'd be willing to bet that most people at Google have no idea who I am and have never heard of me, and I have a YouTube show. Um, and the other thing is, if Google really cared, they could fix it. And they haven't fixed the lorem ipsum trick. They haven't fixed the nothing but schema trick. They haven't fixed keyword stuffing. They haven't fixed white text on a white background, and they haven't fixed hidden divs. And so all of these things that they put into their guidelines is, no-nos. They don't bother to fix them either.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I feel like Google at this point is more interested in replacing organic search with an AI thing rather than fixing it. Because after all those core updates, after all those web spam updates, after all those helpful content updates, all of these things are still ranking. So what the hell were in those updates? Because it sure as heck wasn't a fix for rhinoplasty plano sites that don't even have content.
Well, I mean, Charles and I were having this discussion the other day, and I'm going to quote him. Hopefully, I don't misquote him, but he was basically saying some of the web spam out there is so spammy that it makes my spam look like the New York Times. And I'm like, I'm flattered. I spend a lot of time on my spam. It's good quality spam. It's not the low quality spam like, everybody else has out there. So,
a spam and a scale that
yeah.
a real spam that, like, think about what does Google have to deal with. You think about their database, they're worried about millions and millions of pages. 100 or even 1,000 pages just isn't that big of a deal to them. It's not.
Yeah.
It's the millions where you have to start getting, and you also have to do something that's breaking all their rules and causing trouble. And if you're just learning their algorithm, what
So
they
what
don't
you're
care.
saying is that I'm insignificant. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, we are, and I like that.
Yep.
All right, so there's a question, what's the difference in indexed and served? And there's a reply, that index means the page is stored in Google's systems, and served means it's shown in the search results.
Right.
And the process is crawled, indexed, ranked, and served. And I'd say that's correct. And I'd add a clarification that there's more than one index. So there's a choice thing of which indexes you appear in. And so that is how I would complete that understanding. What do you guys think?
Feel
Agree.
free to rewind to the beginning of this episode.
Yeah.
All right. Um, let's see. Google Search Console shows 2,880 pages of a 5,800 in sitemap discovered, currently not indexed. So, goose eggs. Clicking Learn More says Google did not attempt because it may have overloaded the site. So that usually means that your web server is responding slowly. And because they tried to view it all quickly, they're like, whoa, 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 we got to back off because the response time got slower. So you need to look at your hosting. Something's either insufficient with the hosting or the web development. It's coded in a way that the database access is very slow or
Right.
something like that.
He talks about in the next piece, he's got a scalable cloud site that can ramp up to 100K requests a second. So 3,000 pages isn't, much. I've seen some things like this where it'll give a reason. And, like Ted was talking about earlier, sometimes the reason that it gives you ain't the real reason. One of the things that could be is that you're up against your crawl budget, because Google does have a crawl budget that is site dependent. So, it
And
may have run up against that in its own systems and then just spit out a stupid reason for why it's not going on. I would suggest you try to throw some of those links, in an indexer and start the crawling process and see if that stimulates them to come and get the rest of the stuff. Because right now,
and
Google is crawling aggressively.
and I've noticed that new websites have a crawl budget that feels like it's around 3,000 URLs. And look at the number you got. It's right around 3,000 URLs. So I'm guessing this is getting new website kind of treatment here. Um, but yeah, you can always prioritize a sitemap for the ones that weren't included.
Yeah.
Let me see. And the other thing is just because the hosting is scalable, that's with a static document. If you have database interactions, you could have other bottlenecks in the web development. So you would actually need benchmark times on all the pieces that are assembling the web page. Um, let's see. 783 pages excluded by no index. Well, if they're excluded by no index,
Yeah, but they're
then
not. But they're not. He's saying that no index is not on the page. So, they're giving him a
it
lot
could
of,
be in the robots.txt. There could be a header if it's a custom built web application. Or maybe it is on the page and it's like dynamically loaded. So you're looking at view source when you need to look at the rendered DOM. Yeah, there's a number of things that it could be depending upon how the website is built. Um, let's see, where should we go for that sort of mentorship? You just got to reach out to people. Like there was a time where I took them is when I realized that I could fill my roster with a lot more mentors than I could actual SEO clients. And I could say yes to those $500 and $1,000 a month requests for help that I couldn't afford to execute SEO for, because that's nowhere near enough money to be able to implement SEO. It all comes down to hours, right? So it's got to pay for the hours to do the work. And, $500, $1,000 can pay for the hours to do a mentorship. So you just got to find someone who has the availability and is open. You might find that Charles is open to that, because that's, a 2 hour meeting once a month.
I know, I was going to say, I know that it also depends on who it is, because I know you used to do some of the mentorship. Charles at one point was doing a little bit of that. I don't know how much he's doing now. I know that my wife Honey does some of that, a little bit, but again, it depends on, sort of what's the mentorship that you need and what sort of SEO you're doing. Like if I were an enterprise person needing mentorship, Charles is my guy. That's who I'd reach out to first. And if he didn't know, he might know somebody else who could, be in that position to help you out. So like we were talking about earlier, just reach out to people. Don't be afraid to reach out and just ask the question and, and start that conversation, because most of the people that I know and most of the people you see on this show are very willing to help, guide you or direct you to somebody who can help.
Just follow through with people. So I know we've all experienced this. I had somebody, it was a friend of a friend, and the guy said, "Hey, do you mind if so and so reaches out to you?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure." They reached out to me on LinkedIn. I responded back. I said, I said, "I'm happy to chat with you. You know what? Why don't you use my calendar?" I gave them my calendar link. Said, my calendar's crazy. Here's my calendar link. Grab some time, and we'll chat. They never did it. That was weeks ago. I'm not chasing people around to help them. I'm happy to help people, but I'm not gonna chase you around to help you. And so I think you're gonna find that most people in general, but definitely everybody here is happy to help people. I'm going to I see he's in the chat. I'm gonna do my Clint impersonation though and say, don't be an asshole though. Don't send someone 20 questions a day. Don't go to Lee or Honey or Ted and ask them to basically be your SEO for them for your site
Yeah,
and
no,
ask question after question.
Yeah,
But
the way
that's a
the
funny thing.
mentor Oh, sorry. The way the mentorship should work is you meet once a month, you tell them what you did, you tell them how it worked out, and you
Yeah.
ask them what you should try next.
yeah,
That's
My
how it should work.
my son actually, he's an engineer. He actually was part of a podcast where he talked about this, because he's had a number of successful mentor relationships where he was the mentee. And they've asked, how did you manage to get into these positions and stuff like that? And, part of it is, he said, as a mentee, you have to be worthy of the mentor's time. Don't just come and ask a bunch of questions. Show that you've run into certain walls. You've tried a bunch of things, and you had it didn't work. That you put in some work before coming to them with the question. You don't just come and start to drink from the well without doing anything, because they're much more likely to help you, because they probably went through a similar process. They ran into those walls themselves, and that's how they figured out the things that they figured out. So I'm going to echo the don't be an asshole. You know, come show that you've done some work, and then if you start the relationship, do the work. Follow up with the calendar invite, things like that.
And last question here. Does LLM.text work? And I believe the general consensus is not at this time, but that doesn't mean never.
Agreed.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We will see.